Great, thank you. Um, well, so there's kind of a structure, a bit of a plan that I have in mind tonight. Let's see, I'm just sort of looking here at Zoom, and part of my plan was to actually kind of utilize our breakout rooms that you can use in Zoom, and it looks like. Now that Jesse's not here, I think the plan was that I would be host so that I could create the breakout rooms, but I'm still not host, so I don't think I can create breakout rooms. So we might have to work around that, but we can make this work. Yeah, as Jesse said, I'm Upali, and I'm a full-time Dharma teacher. In particular, I teach a lot of things centered around meditation. I used to kind of call myself a meditation teacher, but well, I guess the honest story is anyone familiar with Stephen Batchelor?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's someone who's really known for, he has a background in Tibetan Buddhism and has actually held counsel with the Dalai Lama, but he's done a lot to contribute towards like this idea of secular Buddhism. And I got to interview him once and talk with him, and there's just so much of his writing that resonated with me. And meeting in person was really great too. And we were talking, and I actually have this podcast called Teaching Meditation. If you'd ever like to check it out, you just, wherever you get podcasts, just type in Teaching Meditation. And the intention of it is to just have conversations with other meditation teachers to learn about how to teach, which I think is really great for people who are sort of like wanting to teach meditation. But I also think it's really fun if you're a practitioner to sort of hear and learn the process of what teachers are thinking and what they're doing to sort of cultivate useful and beneficial experiences, and also to hear their stories of even how they became teachers. So anyway, he came onto this podcast and we got to chat for a while, and he was hesitant to come in because he was like, I'm not actually a meditation teacher. I'm a Dharma teacher. It's like, are you sure your podcast is, for Dharma teachers, or just meditation teachers? And I was like, well, now that you mention it, Stephen, I really like what you're saying about being a Dharma teacher. I actually also identify as a Dharma teacher. That's a great thing to talk about. And so that actually ended up being a part of our conversation in that episode, as we talked about the difference between teaching meditation, teaching Dharma. So anyway, I consider myself a full-time Dharma teacher. And what I like about that is I think of meditation as sort of this really useful and powerful practice and technique that fits into this larger picture of Dharma. My favorite translation of that is truth. So I think of that as not something that is like a sort of a universal or sort of ideological religious truth, more so like a personal subjective experience of what you experience to be true. And that's really centric in how I teach as well. In fact, the sort of best description I have for my teaching is student-centric teaching. I really like to guide people within their own experience and what works for them. I suppose that's all I'll say about myself. Maybe I'll open up the floor just to see if you have any questions for me about who I am, and maybe as a person, a practitioner, as a teacher, anything that I haven't mentioned or that Jesse hasn't mentioned about me before we jump into sort of the topic of this webinar, or really anything about, I'll be doing a retreat in November at the Rocky Mountain Eco Dharma Center. So anything about what that retreat will be like, I'd be happy to answer any questions around that too. So yeah, any questions that you have for me as the person who is the Dharma teacher leading this webinar?
I'm kind of interested in what can you hear me first of all?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. In what your retreat is going to be about and be like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Okay. Yeah. So I worked with the retreat center a bit, trying to find out like what to call the retreat that I would be teaching. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've been on retreats with other Dharma teachers before, where they like pick a topic. I always remember the first retreat I went to, it was like no self, no one to suffer. It seemed like this profound topic, and it's going, oh great, so I'm going to really learn about this. And what it ended up being was like a little bit about that, but mostly about whatever the Dharma teacher wanted to talk about in the moment at the Dharma talk, because it was probably what was most relevant. So I always struggle picking a theme for the meditation retreats, because I find teaching, especially in the retreat space, to be so dynamic. And I think a lot of what you're trying to do as a Dharma teacher, in the sense of like guiding people to what's really works and what feels relevant for them, is just sort of kind of picking up on what matters towards the present moment experience of people who are on that retreat. So an example of that process for me would be the retreats I do are held in noble silence. And that meaning that there's just as little distraction as possible from you being able to engage in your practice. Welcome, Jill. Oh, I would just say maybe for the time being, really love for our conversations to be dynamic and that anyone can jump in. But if you're not muted, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself so background noise doesn't come through. Thanks, Jill. It's another power that I usually have as host, but don't have that power right now. Yeah, so the process of retreats will be noble silence, as little distraction as possible. Always sum it up as like it's not a rigid that you can't speak at all. It's more so just like the intention to not speak unless you have something to say that's more beautiful than the silence itself. And so there's a lot of time for meditation practice. And that can kind of be on your own in nature, but there's usually a meditation hall with a schedule to really support a structure of you engaging with the practice. And then each evening I hold Dharma talks. And those Dharma talks, a lot of times being question and answer, where you can just sort of bring whatever is relevant for you. And if I see themes on the retreat, I'll be like, oh, what's really come up for a lot of people is this. People are feeling tension when they're trying to focus on the breath. And here are some things that I think really work for that. One other aspect would be interviews, is that one thing I try to cultivate in a meditation retreat is just as much access to a teacher as you would need. So there's interviews every other day, and an option, even if you wanted to meet every day, hold like office hours where you can come and visit. So I've always felt really good when I'm on retreat and have access to a teacher. So I try to be as available as possible for practitioners as they need it. So that's a bit of the gist of a lot of meditation. It's kind of some community aspects of like Dharma talks, one-on-one interviews with me. And then the final thing I guess I would say is that aspect of like a student-centric approach. There's a certain background that I'm coming from when I teach meditation. There's certainly a formal training that I've had as a teacher. What I've come to learn is that different methods work better. Different methods work better for different people. So what I like to do is sort of present the perspective that I'm teaching from, and sort of maybe give some context if I'm talking about a specific technique, like, oh, this is more of like a Vipassana noting practice that comes from like the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition, or, oh, this is more of like more of a strictly shamatha practice associated more with those traditions. So I like to sort of present different options and really allow participants to bring what works for them to the retreat, as opposed to sort of a rigid, like you have to meditate this way and follow this exact sort of structure of it. And with that, really treating you as the expert of your own experience. And my role is sort of to, with the experience I have of working with practitioners and also just from my own practice, kind of be there to like really support, affirm your experience, help you feel inspired and confident in what you're doing, and you know, be sort of like a kind of the bumpers here and there if I feel like I could push you in a direction that seems like it would be useful just based on what I know. Well, I suppose I'll stop there. There's a lot more I could say, but does that sort of give you a little bit of an idea of what a retreat process with me would be like?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, okay. And so I started talking about like, it was so hard to come up with the theme. The best I could come up with that I felt like was true to what will unfold on this retreat was letting your practice flourish. And I see retreat as that a lot. It's sort of a platform that just by the nature of sort of like showing up into this space, you know, getting to unplug, getting to be in nature, that in and of itself is usually really beneficial for us. And then getting to meditate on top of that, like here's this environment that's just so good and auspicious and conducive for practice. And that's really what I'm trying to cultivate here, that you would have an experience that would just really let the best things in your practice come forward and that you feel really, really good about that. It's always what I'm shooting for. Thanks for that question, Steve. Is there any other questions about me or the retreat that you'd like to ask before we jump into kind of the content of this webinar?
Okay, I don't want. How many people are you going to? What's the maximum amount of people?
I imagine what I found in my past in teaching retreats is usually the first year I do one, it's like smaller. It's usually a little bit more intimate. And then as I'm able to do it more consistently, then it grows. So I'm actually scheduled to teach this retreat in November. Is it, I was going to say RMERC. Is there like a way to is there like an acronym that people use?
I'm not the one to ask.
Does anybody know?
It's RMERC, RMERC, Rocky Mountain Ecodharma Retreat Center, RMERC.
Great. Okay, so I'll use RMERC. Guess that'll save me from having to say Rocky Mountain Ecodharma Retreat Center every time. So RMERC, this retreat is scheduled in November of this year. And then I've actually already got time reserved for the following year to teach a retreat again. So I would guess this year, if all goes well, we'll show up. It'll be probably a smaller group of around like, I think there's sort of a minimum to hold a retreat. I think it's at least 12, but no more than 16 for the minimum. So it'll be relatively intimate retreat group size. And the maximum that I can do on my own on a retreat like this would probably be 24, but that would be a lot.
That would certainly fill up the meditation hall.
Yeah, I haven't been there before, so I don't know how the facilities are, but I think that would kind of be max capacity for us. And I'd be really surprised if we got there in the first year. I mean, I'm a great Dharma teacher, I promise, but I don't know if I'm that good that I can show up just yet. And you know, 24 people will flock to this retreat in the Rocky Mountains. But yeah, so we'll see how it goes. Maybe another fun thing to mention is I sort of did the math, and by this retreat in November, I'll have taught over 200 days of silent retreat. So there's been a lot of like time that's gone into cultivating a teaching practice that leans towards teaching retreats. I really highly value the time I get to teach meditation retreats, because with the people that I work with, I see it as really just kind of like, I see so many benefits that come from practice. And I see that they just are really enhanced in the space of retreat. It's like one of the most rewarding experiences as a teacher is just to see the benefits that come forth when people are on retreat. So I just I think of it all as like sacred space, just really high value time So I try to teach what I can, and have been putting a lot of time into that over the years in silent retreat spaces. And an example of historically teaching retreats and them growing is there is one retreat I'm teaching in September. I'm getting ready to leave not too far from now for that. And I think it started kind of in a yurt in the desert in Arizona, and 5 people showed up for the first year. And I have a friend, we teach this retreat together, and I don't know how many years ago that was now, but we're getting close to 10 years of teaching this retreat. And this year, I think there's about 50 people who are coming on that retreat. It's really grown over the years, and it's kind of also off in a very natural area, sort of this off the grid meditation space. So
Well, I live in Arizona. Could you tell me where and when that is?
That's in Tucson, Arizona, outside of Tucson, Arizona. We rent a retreat center called Diamond Mountain, just because we were at a smaller one called Dharma Treasure. And I'm also teaching a retreat there, but the big one is happening at Diamond Mountain just because that accommodates more people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting facility. Well, any other questions for me before we jump into the content for tonight? Oh, and maybe at the end of this, I can just send, I have a website, and maybe we'll make sure that we send out that information, and information about the retreat in November at Armork. So we'll have that information, and also have a way to contact me or see other things that I'm offering. Okay, well, I think since we've taken a bit of time here for this introduction of me, as much as I love talking about myself, I would love to talk about you, seeing as how I've said all these things about student-centric Dharma. The topic for tonight is talking about Samadhi. And it's really interesting. It's really interesting content, I think. It's a little bit esoteric. It's kind of hard to define what Samadhi is, because it's like one of those things that when you look into the tradition of Samadhi, I mean, you can look towards Hinduism, you can look towards Buddhism, and there's different ways of defining this. So it can really depend on the context in terms of what Samadhi is. And then also, regardless of the definition that we're giving to it, we're really talking about like a subjective experience that you can have in meditation. And what's so challenging about that is we're talking about the experience of our minds. It's also what's kind of fun about it too. I will never know what your experience is. We can only sort of put these things into words, but I find much like something like love, it is one word, but there have been, countless attempts to define what that is and describe it in so many ways and express it in different ways and sort of try to put your finger on that experience. And sometimes it seems like the moment you put your finger on it is when it's lost because it couldn't be defined by just one word. So it's kind of a samadhi and so many other aspects of meditation just so interesting in that the nature of them is that they're almost impossible to put into words, but we'll do our best. One of my favorite things about coming together and doing our best to put these things into words is a shared experience. One of my concerns when I started meditating was when I went to Sangha and to community to talk about practice. The concern was that if I said what was happening in my own mind, the secret would get out that I'm kind of weird and maybe a little bit crazy. But as I started to put my experience into words, it turns out that that wasn't the case at all. What would happen is people would say, me too. I have that experience as well. What I found when I started putting my experience into words is that there was shared experience, and I felt so affirmed and supported by Sangha, my community. And I think that's one of the really beautiful and key things about us coming together as meditators is that we get to have a shared experience and hopefully feel affirmed and supported in our experience. So I hope that we'll have a bit of an experience as a group tonight. I also hope that we'll have a little bit of experience with actually just practicing this in terms of, I'm going to sort of take this concept and I'm going to put some context to it. We'll work on defining it a little bit. And then we'll try to get into sort of like the practical and tangible aspects of how you might even like go about experiencing this or get towards that subjective experience of Samadhi. Before we jump into that content, I have found oftentimes when I go into Dharma spaces, it kind of feels like we jump right into the good stuff of Dharma. At the same time, I've just emphasized how important and nice Sangha can be. So I'd love for you all, I think we have a small enough group to maybe just go around and break the ice a little bit. Where I'd like to start here is just allowing everyone to say maybe who you are, where you're located. I think a fun question would be, well, there's a couple of questions that are coming to mind that might be good icebreakers. Maybe we could just ask, what matters to you about practice? Like maybe it's a little bit of like, what brought you here this evening? And what's really stood out as kind of like maybe just sort of one kernel of like something that's sort of significant in terms of why you engage in taking 2 perfectly good hours out of your evening to talk with other people about this idea of Samadhi. So for those of you who are here and for those of you who feel comfortable, I know it's a little bit maybe even vulnerable to come into a seminar and just introduce yourself. So as it feels good, if you don't want to introduce yourself, I'll call on you and you could either say pass or just don't unmute. But if you'd like to participate, I'd really welcome you. So the first person on my screen is Steve and Krista. And so, yeah, maybe just introducing who you are, where you're located, and just maybe in a sentence or two, kind of either what brought you here or what you really, what has sort of come forward as like significant or mattering to you about engaging in whatever practice it is that you have.
Well, my name is Steve. What brought me here? No, there was another thing. I'm in Prescott, Arizona.
Great.
And we got an email saying a little bit about you and this, I don't remember what this was called, workshop maybe? Webinar?
Webinar, I think is the term, yeah.
And Samadhi is a very interesting topic. It's, and you looked very interesting as well. And that's what, quickly, I could go on, but I think you wanted something short, so that'll do.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks, Steve. That should give plenty of time for others to speak up. So, Krista, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Krista, also live in Prescott, Arizona, apparently.
Strangely,
It'd be impressive if you were not also in Prescott, Arizona.
Well, yes, I attended the Inner Outer Nature Retreat a few weeks ago at Armark, and I really enjoyed it. And I saw this email today. We became members a few weeks ago, and so I asked Steve if we want to do this webinar.
Great. Well, welcome. So nice to have you here, and thanks for being the brave people to go first. Sharon, you're the next person on my screen if you would like to go.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Sharon Ripner. I'm from San Luis Obispo, California. And I was at Armark last week. It's just been a week, a little more than a week ago, for David Chernikoff's retreat, which was really good. I shared it with my husband, which was the first time I'd shared a silent retreat with my husband. And
wow.
It's a little different.
Congratulations. Yeah, that's special.
So I'm looking forward to, I'm going back to Armor in October for Barry Gillespie's Meta Retreat. I'm here because it's one of the perks we're given for being members and supporting the center. And I came to hear a talk on Samadhi, so I'm looking forward to your starting that.
Great. Thanks, Sharon. And the next person on my screen is Lei. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but it's Leisha?
It's Lilia.
Lilia, okay.
If you think rhymes with Maria, that easy way to
Ah,
remember it, because the J is actually a vowel. Lilia Roy, I live in Denver. I'm a full-time artist. I'm an eco-seductress. And I've been to, I think this is the third webinar that I've enjoyed. And I was interested in the topic, but mainly interested in meeting other members.
awesome. Great. Thank you, Lilia. Love the, wow, what was the phrase that you just used? Did you say eco-seductress?
I paint so that you fall in love with the wilderness and want to protect it.
Ah, that's so cool. That resonates with me because I feel like a big part of holding retreats in spaces like Armork is to also help people fall in love with the wilderness. So I like to think of that as something that I also try to cultivate for people.
I haven't.
Painting.
I'm a recent member. I haven't. It's been too hot for me to hike. But my intent is to get to the retreat center, enjoy the trails that you can reserve, and start painting from that space.
Lovely, cool. So I'm noticing there's this kind of a nice thing that I think is unfolding here. It's kind of my intention a little bit, but everyone that's here is a member at Armork. So there is some potential for crossover and actually being in person together. Yeah, I guess I'm just enjoying that a little bit of this community side of it. Okay, Curtis, you're next on my screen.
Are you talking to me, Curtis White?
Yeah, Curtis
Or
White.
a different
Yeah.
Curtis?
It looks like you're the only Curtis that I see. So,
I think there are two
yes,
Curtises somehow, but my name is Curtis White. I'm in Port Townsend, Washington. And I'm a writer. I'm here, I am a member of the Rocky Mountain Echo Dharma Retreat Center. But I'm here today because I'm really interested in, I'm sort of omnivorously interested in Dharma traditions. And I'm very interested in the Upali tradition of especially the 7th and 8th folds in the Eightfold Path. And how Samadhi, how mindfulness Samadhi, the jhanas and Vipassana sort of work together. It's a little confusing to me, especially, but I'll perhaps get into that later, but that's why I'm here.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Curtis. There's really wonderful things that you're sharing as well. Your curiosity and even confusion resonate with me. Or I don't know, very confusion, but recognition of complexity resonates with me. John Steele, you're the next person on my screen. If you'd like to go.
Hi. Yeah, I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I was involved with Johan Robbins and David Loy at some nature retreats that they did on rivers and up in the mountains before they began the center. And I just love the practice of meditation in nature because it draws me naturally into a state of absorption with much less effort than in the meditation hall, I find. I haven't attended any retreats with them there, but I'm a member of a local Zen center in Denver. And we had a session there a couple of years ago. We're having another one this September. I'm looking forward to getting up to I just love the land there. It's just so beautiful. And being a member, seeing this talk, I thought I'd like to join. everything we say about meditation is so far away from the experience. You know, we name it samadhi, and it suddenly becomes a thing. And all these states are quite vague and hard to pin down. But I certainly love it when I'm in deep meditation. I feel completely absorbed, and it's like if there's any thoughts, they're way off in the background, and I'm not identified with them. And to me, that's as close as I've come to what I think of as samadhi. But I'm always a little like, well, what's the point in talking about it? And yet I'm here because I'm interested in, what we might be able to uncover.
Great, great. Yeah, me too. I am interested to see what we uncover here. Wonderful. Thank you, John. And I'm also noticing a bit of a theme here around nature. It makes sense that we would be interested in that. There's actually a sutta that talks about the jhanas, that just all it is born of seclusion, and it talks about a monastic going into the woods, and that's it. That's how you enter the jhana, is you just hang out in the woods. It does seem to be the case that experience is true for a lot of people, and that ecology, nature, seems to be really auspicious towards these good states of meditation, really useful towards them. So the next person on the screen that I see, it's just as B. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. B is the name. I'm here in Boulder, and pretty much, curiosity. Curiosity is why I'm here, and open to whatever will be shared. Yeah, short.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks, B. Really nice to hear your curiosity and openness. Jill, you're next on my screen. If you would like to go.
Yes, hold on, I'm turning it on. Okay.
Hi.
I'm Jill, and I'm from Boulder, and I have been hiking and on retreat at the center earlier this summer. I'm also an eco artist, doing work around climate change and environmental issues through my art. So I also been curious and wanting to learn more about the whole samadhi concept. So that's what I'm here.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Jill. And yeah, so fun to be around so many creative folks too, also interested in nature. Elaine, you're next on the screen if you'd like to go.
I'm Elaine. I live in Lakewood, Colorado. I've been to the Echo Dharma Center multiple times pre-COVID. I'm going to attend a retreat there next week, so I'm really looking forward to that. What brought me to this today, well, to the members group, is curiosity, and to come to hear you is curiosity. I've been a student of Thich Nhat Hanh's for the last 20 plus years, and he always encouraged us to not stick with just him, to explore other possibilities. So here I am.
Lovely. Thanks, Elaine. Actually, that kind of brings up a question for me. If I'm not mistaken, I think Thich Nhat Hanh actually identified as a Buddhist Christian, which would sort of be a testament to sort of his openness, of like, kind of like an ecumenical approach. Is that wrong? Or
No, he was a Buddhist. When he was a child, Vietnam was occupied by the French, and so he
Okay.
went to a Catholic school because he was forced to. But he left home and went to the monastery when he was 16.
Okay.
He's
He did?
no, he's
Uh,
he's he's definitely a Buddhist.
Thich Nhat Hanh did write a book with Daniel Berrigan.
Oh yeah, and he wrote 2 other books, Living Buddha, Living Christ, and Jesus and Buddha as Brothers, and he talked about how the similarities, the differences between Christianity and Buddhism, and we all felt that if anybody could put those 2 religions together, he could, because of his experience with it, with both of them. People that were of other religions would get upset at him because he only talked about Christianity and Buddhism, and try and get people to understand that he never talked about anything that he hadn't experienced for himself, which is why those were the only things he talked about, because that was his life experience.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that for me. I think that topic is really interesting to me because I, like a lot of people in the West, grew up in Christian tradition and kind of switched over to following Buddhism, which was a really significant process and sort of my journey, my path. And it's always interesting to see people are working and sort of bringing sort of connection in those spaces. Okay, so there's 2 more folks I would love to have a chance to introduce themselves if they'd like to. So there's Barbara. Barbara, would you like to say hello? Okay, so since Barbara isn't unmuting, if it's just taking you a moment to unmute, just feel free to chime in whenever, Barbara, but we'll move on to Maureen, if you'd like to say hello, Maureen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen, currently residing in the mountains of Eastern California on the traditional lands of the Paiute and the Mono people. And I'm here with my little dog. And what brought me here tonight was an interest in the topic and also an interest in you, Upali, as a teacher. Your resume or intro bio and the email sounded really intriguing to me. I'm very fond of nature meditation practice, and so it was intriguing to me to see your solo wilderness meditation retreat experiences. So
Cool. Yeah, it's a topic I love to go into. Well, thanks everyone for introductions. On that note of the solo wilderness retreats, I actually just did one this past week. It was my birthday on Monday, and my birthday present for myself was to go into the woods for the majority of the week. So it was really restorative just to get some time in nature. Much like people are describing all the benefits and kind of enjoyment of connecting with nature and the significance, the importance. It's really inspiring for me to hear kind of the not only talking about the nice things of nature, but also the kind of the importance of the safeguarding, the protection, the support, the healing of nature. So my intention here, it was eventually to kind of give us time where it feels a little bit more like free flowing and less cumbersome to be able to kind of work together as a group with our size. It just is a little bit slow and clunky. So since I can't do those breakout rooms, I think we'll have to sort of work with what we've got. I noticed as soon as, I think we had like 15 people here at the beginning of the webinar. And I suppose by the nature of a webinar, maybe there is the sense of like anonymity that you could show up and not have to talk. I think like 4 people dropped out when I asked people to introduce themselves. I'm actually going to see that as maybe okay, that if you're sticking around, it feels okay to participate. Of course, it's not required to participate, but I would really love sort of a modality that I've been kind of learning in, practicing in, and growing in that kind of talks about like this natural intelligence that arises in group settings, you know, being able to bring all of our experiences together, and that there's just sort of through that sort of collective diversity, a lot of times like kind of what we need to know or what matters sort of comes to the surface. So I really appreciate your participation, appreciate your patience with the introductions. Oh, Elaine, I think your example of explaining about Thich Nhat Hanh and Christianity, when I was like, oh, isn't he a Christian Buddhist? We definitely got some great clarification there and context on that. A really good example of feedback and group intelligence. So, okay, so let's move on to a bit of the main event here. Let's start talking about Samadhi, and we'll start from this higher level view of it, and kind of work on defining it a little bit, and sort of exploring kind of its context and what it sort of means in meditation. And then from there, there's sort of a specific kind of approach that I'm going to take with it. And the reason I want to do that is it's the one that sort of, it's one of the more familiar ways that I'm accustomed to talking about Samadhi. But more than just that, what I especially like about it is that I think it'll take us into talking about our own experience, talking about the mind, talking about like aspects of our own consciousness that gives us something a little bit tangible to work with. Okay, so I'm going to stick with this theme of group intelligence. The topic tonight is Samadhi. What is Samadhi? Hearing your introductions, I'm getting the sense that a lot of you have thought about this before, have a certain curiosity for it, but that this isn't the first time you've heard about Samadhi. Would anybody like to sort of take a stab at maybe just like a quick definition of like, if you could put Samadhi into words, what would it be?
Well, I'd start by saying I think it's a deep state of absorption where there's a sense of deep connection and oneness, and there's a kind of samadhi or a level of samadhi where the mind becomes silent. In other words, the word thinking part of the mind is no longer there. It's no longer present, or if there is anything, it's not identified with. That's my sense of Samadhi.
Great, right. So if we think of meditation, some people think of it as like, well, I meditate to quiet my mind. If we're talking about an experience of a mind being quiet, Samadhi might be a really good example of it. Or like if the mind can get to a place that is quiet, the likelihood of Samadhi being present is high. Okay, so we've got this definition of like a absorption into a conscious state, and also a certain degree of stillness, quietness, non-distraction of mind. Wonderful. Thanks for bringing that forward, John. Any other kind of unset? Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I often would get into this state that I would call samadhi, or very deep concentration. And other teachers call it sinking mind, that my concentration, my ability to maintain focus is not bright, that it's kind of more of a sinking mind. It's not sleeping, it's not, I used to do that, but it's not that. It's just that I, like during a meditation session, if a teacher starts to do some instruction or guided meditation and I'm in this state, I just don't hear them.
Yeah, okay.
But they call that a sinking mind and something I should avoid.
Yeah, okay, great. This is wonderful. So there's a question here that Sharon's proposing. And one thing that I love about the question is that Sharon's also bringing forth like part of her own experience. So this is something that I really love in Dharma spaces that I think is actually kind of unique sometimes, that we get to really talk about our experience, like what's actually happening when we're meditating. So the nuance around here is like, okay, how do we know if we're in this state of kind of deep absorption and kind of a depth to our conscious experience, if it's possible that we could be in a state of sinking mind, that actually we're not absorbed, we're not engaged, we're actually detached. And I guess in the nature of this being a question, I'll just give a really quick answer here that we'll sort of explore in our own experience later. The terminology that I have for making a distinction between a state of like clarity that leads to samadhi versus a state that leads to, like that phrase, a sinking mind, the term would be dullness. So the way I like to describe this is like in the states of meditation, what we're trying to do is we're essentially trying to turn the volume knob up on our conscious experience. Probably makes sense, right? Like probably got into meditation because you wanted to be aware. And in order to be aware, there's a certain degree of wakefulness associated with that. You know, if an outcome, I guess I'm having the same issue of Steve and Krista, if you can hear me. I think you're unmuted, if you wouldn't mind unmuting for the background noise. Thanks. So the idea of wakefulness and meditation, you know, Buddha literally can translate to like the awakened one. You know, if this path is leading towards awakening, in the process, it's probably important that we're awake. And this actually seems to be literally true in terms of like measuring what's happening in meditation, in terms of like using like an EEG. It seems that when someone is meditating and doing so, they're doing so with some degree of sort of connection, that they're exhibiting signs of a brain that is awake, actually as awake as a brain can be. So there actually is a state that is distinct to samadhi that is characterized by that wakefulness. And there are other states that might be characterized as actually focused and absorbed, but not wakeful. So a great example of this is here we are in this virtual space. Does anybody do anything like watch Netflix or movies on devices? I don't know, maybe you all are so immersed and engaged with nature that this isn't something that you do, but you've probably had the experience that you could keep your attention on something for a long period of time, 2 hours, not really be distracted, but also not come away feeling like you had an awakening experience. So there's a certain state of focus and absorption that wouldn't necessarily be characterized by wakefulness. What we could say about that state is this term dullness seems useful. That sounds like it has sort of like negative connotation, but it would be a stable state where there is stability of attention, but there are moments of non-perception. This makes a lot of sense when we're sleeping, that there's non-perception as it relates to consciousness. You know, the perceptions is very distinct from when we're awake, much less perception than wakefulness, even though we still perceive dreams and things like that. And what we're cultivating in meditation is that in each moment there's perception. If you think of it actually like well, actually, I'm going to leave that metaphor for later, but that's one thing that we can sort of distinguish here as we're defining samadhi, is that we're looking for a state of stability, concentration, absorption even, that's characterized by wakefulness. It is possible to have experiences that are not wakefulness in meditation. That makes a lot of sense. Until you started meditation, what else would you do when you turned your attention inward, closed your eyes and relaxed? You probably went to sleep. So it makes sense that we're going to work with non-perception as we're trying to cultivate focus states in meditation. Okay, so I guess I was trying to answer your question to a certain degree, Sharon, but what if I could put it in a nutshell, it would essentially be that yes, there are states where non-perception or dullness can arise as we're cultivating stability of attention in meditation and samadhi. And that's part of the process. So we work towards creating more and more perception as we're cultivating more and more stability and awareness. Does that help? Great. In particular, I love to emphasize how just natural that experience of dullness is going to be, and actually even how great it can be. It feels kind of good, you know, like when you're watching the movie, it feels awesome. It's really enjoyable. So there's sort of like a sense of ease and kind of contentment that can even come out of that dullness. It's just that, so it's a natural thing to arise. Just that it gets so much better as the clarity starts to arise. And kind of much like John is describing in terms of those conscious states where you're like, it's like you're really there, you're present, but the thoughts are in the background. Ooh, that's good stuff. Good enough to make you want to go out in a natural setting and sit in silence for days on end. It's that good. It's totally worth it. Okay, so I feel like we're getting a little bit more closer to what the samadhi is. Any other ideas around what samadhi is, what it could be, how we could define it?
The word equipoise is often used with samadhi. It's a kind of peculiar word, equipoise.
Yeah, Curtis, would you care to say more about that? Do you want to share what equipoise means?
Well, it's I really don't know what it means per se. It's always made a lot of sense to me. The word itself feels sort of balanced and open at the same time. So it's, but it's a sort of, it sort of suggests to me a kind of perfection of awakeness and calm. So completely open, but also completely calm.
Yeah, awesome. I really like that one. Completely open, but completely calm. I think also, especially in that context of wakefulness I was describing, I'm sure you've had experiences that are like too awake. Maybe there are some coffee drinkers here, but I feel like after that, you know, when you had too much coffee, it's probably a little too awake.
One of the meditation techniques that I like to try when I can't seem to remember how to meditate is just simply to be alert to every sound around me and every movement, and just letting it go. The sound or the what I'm seeing, it appears and it passes, and that seems to me to say to have something to do with equipoise.
Yeah, lovely. Great. And so what's interesting in the context of samadhi of what you're presenting there is before I was talking about kind of the stability of attention and kind of cultivating kind of concentration and wakefulness within that concentration. And what I hear you describing there sounds a lot about like the awareness side of it. Mm-hmm. Kind of like knowing kind of, okay, if I'm trying to be focused on my breath, let's say, or maybe even just focused on the intention of letting go and be present with that, there's a sort of knowing. That's the word mindfulness comes from the Pali word sati. I'm sure many of you know that. And sati, I think, best translate actually to just simply awareness. So it's sort of this more broader understanding of like context, what's sort of going on outside of your intention, your meditation object, and being able to see that. In fact, sati sampajana is really key here of like mindfulness with clear comprehension. Not only are you knowing that you're breathing in and breathing out, you're also knowing like, what's the quality of this? Is it fuzzy? Is it clear? Is it distracted? Is it focused? Those are some really key ingredients to get to those, getting at kind of like that really useful state, that really gratifying state of meditation.
I sort of associate that technique, though, of being awake to the things that are going on around me with that, with the saying that probably everybody here has heard of, it. There are no footprints in the sky. So to imagine to imagine things that are happening around you as being purely, passing, while there's a deeper background that embraces all of those things, and that's a lovely thought, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so you're getting there into something that is kind of the question of like, why even talk about this? Like, why even cultivate samadhi? And an answer, there are actually some really practical answers. We'll talk about attention here, and like what that even is and how to cultivate stability of it. And, for a lot of people this day and age, the idea of being able to focus and pay attention is really important. And that can be a draw of meditation. I taught mindfulness in middle schools here in Chattanooga. And one of the ways that we could sell teaching mindfulness in public schools in a very conservative area of the country was like, it's going to help your kids pay more attention. It was the aspects of like attention regulation and emotion regulation that were just so appealing and appreciated by the teachers who got to provide mindfulness for their students. And so the idea that you would be able to, well, the thing that I said when I was a kid is everyone, about being a kid, everyone told me to pay attention, but nobody told me how. Meditation is that process of how one could even pay attention in the first place and how to do that consistently and how to do it skillfully. So that is really key towards understanding how to even cultivate samadhi in the first place. But then the question would be like, well, why? If you get really good at entering into a state of samadhi by staring at your breath, well, the state of samadhi itself is probably going to show itself to be like nice and good and useful. But like, what do you have to share about that? Being able to pay attention to your breath clearly and consistently is not a very exciting party trick. I mean, you could sit down and do it, but nobody would know you were doing it, and you couldn't prove that you were really. Why would we do that? And I think what you're getting at, the reason why I'm going a bit on this tangent, is Curtis, you're pointing towards how that leads to a certain awareness of things that matter, things that seem to be really connected with, maybe we could say how things are, just for lack of a better phrase, but one of those things being the impermanence of phenomena. If we're really focused, we get more into this process state, we can see the arising and passing. I'm looking at this computer, I'm talking with you, I feel like me, you look like you, the computer is solid. Here in the space of kind of concept and experience, there's an appearance of like separation and solidity. But as we go further and further into the state of samadhi, it gets towards cultivating knowing and seeing of those aspects of our experience that are so useful towards vipassana, towards insight, towards seeing that freeze, we could say. So impermanence being a really key component of that, both kind of seeing and experiencing the impermanence of phenomena. Samadhi seems really useful towards that. Okay, so thanks for that, Curtis. Allowed me to go on to get to the bottom of everything, sort of talk about the big picture of why I do this in the first place. Maybe I'll open up the floor just one more time. Is there any other kind of ideas or thoughts or concepts around samadhi that anyone would like to sort of propose here or share, express? Okay, so what I think I'll do now is just talk a little bit about how I'm going to define samadhi for the purposes of our discussion. So there's a lot that's presented here that is really relevant. I think we've already covered a lot of ground on the kind of what samadhi potentially is. I actually sort of in preparation for this was talking to other Dharma friends, and while I felt like I had a certain clarity around what Samadhi is, I think I got to a place that maybe Curtis, you were describing earlier, of actually the more that I started trying to, in my experience, it was just so clear and defined, and sort of the context of what I learned it had seemed clear and defined. But then the more that I dove into it, the more that I found the complexity and how hard it was to define Samadhi. So that's maybe one thing that I'll just mention. I kind of mentioned briefly before, but I'll just mention it again. It really is going to depend on the context and tradition in terms of if you're giving a definition of Samadhi, what that is. So an example of that would be like in Hinduism, Samadhi is sort of like this final state of union. It is like the ultimate state of awakening and realization. That's what Samadhi is referring to. Again, that also probably depends on the context within Hinduism itself. It's like, but from like a yogic Hindu traditions. Another example would be sometimes there's a friend I was talking with who is very much like trained in the Thai forest tradition. And he's talking about like the Buddha talking of Samadhi as just sort of like kind of one of the highest sort of goals of practice, if we could even call it a goal of practice, but sort of like one of the greatest things that can arise out of practice is Samadhi. And Samadhi really, in some traditions, referring to like fruition. That Samadhi is present when you can actually, sustain focus on nibbana, sustain focus on cessation. And that, of course, gets really complex and maybe even more esoteric. My favorite way of defining Samadhi is actually not so esoteric. The way that I try to impart this to students when I'm talking about practicing and the idea of Samadhi arising is, and I think this is kind of just the simplest definition of it, it's just like a distinct conscious state that arises out of meditation. The subjective experience for me of it would be if I've been meditating for a while and things are quite settled. If I ask myself, is this conscious state the same as when I'm off the cushion, or is this sort of special or distinct to meditation? And then the answer would arise pretty quickly of like, this is really different. This is something that is specific to meditation. It's really distinct as a result of meditation. So it's a distinct conscious state that is going to arise in meditation. And what it's going to be characterized by is some degree of focused attention, probably some degree of that experience of settling, and some degree of awareness that's there. So key components here, and I'm going to keep defining things and clarifying what I mean by this, but those two aspects of attention and awareness are going to be really useful here in terms of us sort of cultivating this experience for ourselves. Those are sort of the processes that really help us know how to move towards this. In particular, maybe one final thing I'll say about just defining this in a certain context is I'm looking at Samadhi as defined as like a unification of mind. One literal translation of it could be like kind of like a settling that happens. So what unification of mind could mean, actually really like this in almost a psychotherapy context. Is anybody familiar with internal family systems? You heard of this before? Maybe a show of hands, yeah. If you're not familiar, it's just like this, it sounds like it's probably going to be familiar to a lot of you. I know this is a really popular and powerful form of psychotherapy. But it's the idea of like, if you look at your experience, you could see that there are different parts to it. And so the therapeutic process would be like working with those parts. I have a friend who's a meditator who would talk about being distracted by actually really emotional content and trying to figure out what that was and how to work with it. And he said that the thing that really helped him was to ask the content, how old are you? And sometimes the answer would come back and be like, oh, I'm 12. It's like, oh, that's why I have this perspective. This is something that I learned when I was young. and it still holds this worldview. And what it's trying to do is really integrate with my adult perspective. So now I can look at that and see how true it is. Is it useful? Is it not? Does it have a certain need? Can I care for it? Help it feel really welcomed at the table and as I'm trying to move forward. So I bring that up because I think it kind of makes sense towards this idea of unification of mind. Well, what is the mind unifying around? In meditation, I'm going to say, for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to talk about like a meditation object. And this could be really anything that you like to use. Characteristically, meditation objects are usually like neutral, would be a good description. But I'll talk about the breath. So let's say our intention in meditation is just to rest our attention on the breath. Just know that we're breathing in, know that we're breathing out, and just be present with that. What will likely happen when you're doing that is other things are going to arise. From an evolutionary perspective, just resting your attention on the breath is not very good for survival. The example that I give is like if a deer was eating grass. Ooh, we can make a Rocky Mountain metaphors. All right, so if we have an elk eating some grass up in a meadow in the Rockies, and they're eating that grass and they're just really with that grass and they're like, grass is so good. I love grass, delicious, delicious grass. Their attention is totally absorbed into eating that grass. They're not going to be very good at noticing that mountain lion lurking off in the distance that wants to eat them. It is very important, actually, that elk's attention moves away from the grass, notices the environment, that it actually becomes distracted so it can make sure that it's safe. And this is, in a lot of ways, what we're running up against in meditation. We're asking the mind to unify around just breathing, being present with the breath. What's arising out of that is all of our own sort of social conditioning and programming, all of our own personal psychology and all of our history with that. But then also like all of this history of our own evolutionary biology. The mind saying, are you sure you want to just breathe? Aren't there things that are more important to your survival than just this? In a lot of ways, what we're doing in the practice is almost like of cultivating samadhi is exposure therapy. It's like, well, yeah, we can just do this. I mean, look at what we're doing. We're sitting quietly and doing nothing, a place that's pretty safe. Of all the things we could do with our time, this is the safest thing we could do. It is perfectly fine to just breathe. See, I'll prove it to you. Let's try it for a few seconds. Oh, nothing bad happened. In fact, it felt kind of nice. We can keep going. So unification of mind and the growth and sort of the flourishing of this comes out of that training of attention to be with the breath. There's going to be resistance to that naturally. And so it's that process of training the mind that leads to samadhi being able to arise, the mind becoming more and more unified around that intention to just be with the breath. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there and just see if there are any questions, comments, anything that we want to explore from here in terms of defining samadhi, sort of getting at what samadhi is or what it potentially could be. And I'm getting a little bit into defining what the mind, working with the mind might look like and what unification of mind is. So is there anything that's coming to mind? So feeling free to just like chime in, open up your mic, ask questions, but also I guess I want to give space if anyone's feeling a little shy that you can also throw a question into the chat box too. I'd be happy to read that. So what's on your mind?
Fine.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. One of the things I find is common when I'm getting into early stage of samadhi is that the breath is slow and even and smooth. And it's like the slowness and smoothness is both on the in-breath and on the out-breath. And it was interesting. I've been listening to Ajahn Suchito lately, and as he was talking about that, he says, you know, as you're going into your breath, just establish that that consistency right away, and you'll be able to, you're likely to be able to move into samadhi a lot quicker. Sometimes I feel like I'm on this huge swing and I'm pulling in and then I'm going out. Anyway, I guess that's all I got to say.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I'm hearing like a sort of a shared sharing of an experience there, and yeah, that sounds quite interesting, Steve. Like that experience of kind of movement in and out with the breath and being able to settle into that and stay with that relatively quickly. Sounds quite nice.
More typically for me, what happens is I might get into a rhythm with the breath for a few minutes, and then unbeknownst to me, I'm thinking. So there's been this little loss of consciousness and jumping into the thinking mode, and I'm off somewhere. And then I say, oh, thinking. And then I come back and I regain the breath. And there's this back and forth between distraction and attention.
Yes, great. So I'm imagining this probably resonates with others here. If you've tried to kind of had the intention to be present with something and notice that there's a back and forth with content, distractions, thinking that's arising, that's certainly a thing that we've experienced. Is that resonating with anyone else?
Resonates with me.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, so this is a good point to bring up, and it's getting into kind of the process of how can we go about doing this. So here we have like Steve shared the experience of like really feeling present with that movement of breath and experiencing that. And John and Sharon are talking about the experience of distraction. So I'm not hearing any questions specifically about like kind of defining samadhi. What I'm hearing is kind of an excitement to go into the experience of what we're talking about. So I think this is a great opportunity to move in that direction. And that is absolutely what I wanted sort of our takeaway from tonight to be, is kind of more so than coming with like a perfect definition of what samadhi is, that there's some sort of technique or skill that you feel like you've got to approach, practice, or hone, or even just sort of kind of grow, I suppose, in your experience of this. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about just like the how of cultivating samadhi, and I went into a little bit of that with kind of this talking about unification of mind. So the thing that I want to kind of get to here is just actually talking about that aspect of attention. So again, for the purpose of our conversation, I'm going to define our conscious experience, just our present moment conscious experience, as divided into two experiences. And I'm going to say, it's always hard to say anything definitive about consciousness. Science of consciousness started in the 90s. It's very new. There isn't any consensus on exactly what consciousness is, though there's growing schools of consensus around what it is, but there's definitely lots of debate among those schools about what's the actual thing going on with our consciousness. So there's a lot of curiosity in consciousness. In fact, that's what I think is really fun about meditation in some ways, is that we're just going into the experience of consciousness for ourselves. We're just like scientists collecting data around the actual experience of it. And I think that's kind of neat, knowing that the science of this is actually still new and unknown. But I'm going to say in a sort of definitive way that there are two experiences to our consciousness: attention and awareness. both of those processes are actually happening at the same time to varying degrees. And in fact, when we talk about mindfulness, a nice way to define the subjective experience of mindfulness is, this is kind of a nerdy way to say it, the optimal interaction between attention and awareness. That when you've got this good state of the attention being focused, or at least knowing what it wants to do, and then a good understanding of everything else that's happening outside of that, you have what is experienced as mindfulness. The space, the subjective experience of actually having a space between stimulus and response. The subjective experience of paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. This is when mindfulness really arises in its best form. And we've got this good interaction between attention and awareness. Okay, so hopefully that theory is sounding decent in terms of what consciousness is. I want to try to show you how it's relevant to your experience. So first thing that I'll say about this is attention is kind of associated with our sense of self. We could actually say this is egoic. It's what feels like us, and it's where our agency lies, right? So if someone asks you, what are you doing right now? You would say, well, I am listening to Upali give a webinar on Samadhi. You wouldn't say, I'm aware of the sensations in my right big toe. That wouldn't be your response in terms of what you're doing. The sensations in your right big toe are certainly happening. You know, you do have a foot, your toe is still there, but it's not what you associate with what you are doing. So it's the sense of what you are doing that is where our attention lies. So that's the experience of attention, distinct to the experience of awareness, which is we're not so identified with that, yet it is still our experience. Like we know there are sensations in our body, we know there's an environment that we're in. So knowing those kind of two aspects of what attention is, kind of like how awareness is sort of the container, sort of holding where our attention is, it gives maybe a little bit of an experiential understanding of what those two categories are within your own conscious experience. Nice metaphor here is thinking of like awareness is like a floodlight. You know, it allows sort of like a seeing of what's going on around you. Attention is kind of like a high-powered beam. It's like the floodlight's there, and all of a sudden, if something's interesting within that floodlight, like, oh, I think there's a deer over there. You know, the more high-powered light beam can go towards the deer and be like, there's some, that is a deer, and here's what I can tell you about that deer. This deer has antlers, that one does not. So one more thing that I'm going to, I know I'm giving you quite a bit of information here, but one more thing I'm going to do that kind of gets into this experiential realm of attention and awareness, and then I'll open it up for questions in case you have any, is we can actually kind of experience this right now in terms of like what the cultivation of mindfulness might be like within our conscious state. And the way we can do that is through our visual field. I would say this is kind of a metaphor, but what happens in our visual field actually almost seems to be literally true with what happens with our mind. Okay, so there's a reason why I'm holding this up here. This is a headphone case for the headphones that I'm wearing right now. Every time I do this example, it's one of my favorite examples to do. I always just find the props that are on my desk. So you just have to deal with whatever I find. So I've got a headphone case and a quarter. What you would notice in just sort of paying attention to these things is you could even try this right now. I'm going to hold these up. You could just move your attention back and forth. Yeah, move your attention back and forth between the quarter and the headphones. And I'll do this with you. I'm doing it. Okay, so what I notice is if I ask you, okay, what could you tell me about each? What you could say is, at least what's coming to mind for me, is essentially that this thing is silver and this is white. Okay, so that's an experience of attention moving. It's like we know there are these things here, the details aren't so clear. When the attention stabilizes, we use the quarter, I think it shows up better in the camera. when the attention stabilizes, now if I ask you just keep your attention there, would anybody like to say things about this quarter that they didn't notice before? You can feel free to just chime in. All right, since no one's chiming in, I'll go ahead and give you the answers.
There's an image on it that I can see.
Yeah, exactly. There's an image. Ooh, that actually is making me curious. What is this image? Well, it's a 2020. That's when it was made. Land stewardship. Is this Illinois? I thought this was a state, but I don't know what it is. Anyway, yeah, that's right. There's an image that's on it. It looks like there's a person planting a plant. So, okay, kind of intentionally, I was holding it back here. When it's back here, you could probably say, and you're, especially when you're moving attention between these two, that is probably, it's a coin of some sort. It's probably a quarter. Maybe there's some shininess to it. The color is silver. Now we look closely and it's like, okay, there's actually quite a bit of reflection of light. There's even a smudge on this. There's an image in it. What I'm trying to highlight here is that when you fixate your attention on something, what the attention is very good at doing is highlighting details. It's going to be able to tell you a lot about what's going on in this quarter. So as you notice, if the attention is moving back and forth and isn't especially stable, its capacity towards detail is diminished. As the attention stabilizes, its capacity towards detail is increased. So attention is good at this. It's going to be able to pick things apart really well. Now, the part about this that I think is really cool is if you notice your attention moving back and forth between these two things, my experience right now, what I could say is there are things around me. I can't tell you that much about them, kind of nebulous. There's some green colors, there's some white colors. You can even try this in your own visual field if you'd like to do it. You try it on the screen with me or just something in your environment. When I put my attention on this quarter and I let the attention stabilize there, I can tell you more details about the quarter itself, but I can actually tell you way more details about the room that I'm in. Without moving my attention away from the quarter, I can tell you that there are paintings in the corner of my office. They're actually in the window. And I didn't notice those before when my attention was moving back and forth. So those paintings that are in the window are coming forward. There's another painting in the background that wasn't so clear. What happens in our visual field here is that with that stabilization of attention, our awareness of the space grows. We could say a lot more about what's going on around us. And this is a part where this seems to be almost literally true of our minds. As we stabilize attention, as the settling happens, we start to know a lot more about what's happening in the mind, for better or for worse sometimes. We know a lot about, wow, I just planned what's for lunch 15 times. It seems like I could have done this once, but it just keeps happening. This content that we probably wouldn't notice otherwise, because during the day off of the cushion, our attention is moving around as it should. The awareness that we have in terms of the content of the mind is kind of diminished. So what we do in meditation that's sort of unique and special in this context of attention awareness is cultivate stable attention, the awareness flourishes, and these two start working together quite nicely in a way that gives us a pretty distinct experience of mindfulness. Okay, so this is my presentation on attention and awareness, or conscious experience. And this is really relevant towards the unification of mind and cultivation of samadhi. And we'll get into the experience of that here in just a moment, but I'm going to pause again, see if there are any questions, comments, sort of modes of exploration that you'd like here.
Well, I was interested in what you said about when the mind is focused and concentrated, there's also awareness of space. And that's something I really enjoy in meditation. There's a sense of spacious awareness, even though I may be focused primarily on one sound or the breath or a mantra, that there's a sense of stability and space and a sense of having a lot of space is just very, very pleasant.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious about that. What's pleasant about that space? Ooh,
Well,
yeah.
there's a sense of freedom, I think. Like there's room for anything here.
Hmm.
Uh, and just the heightened level of consciousness. It's hard to put words to, but just what you said about there being both focus and space, awareness of space, um, that's just an important piece of what happens when the mind becomes concentrated, and it feels good.
Great. Yeah. 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 So there's a distinct experience there, and um, feels good. Um, awesome. So, any other questions or comments here? Okay. Well, if there's nothing that's showing up now, there'll probably be a little more space to jump in and ask about these things later. But what I would love to do is get into just a little bit of practice, if that's feeling good and okay for people. How does that sound that we try some of this out a little bit? Okay, so excellent. So the thing that we're going to do here is just a little bit of an experiment. And what I'm going to invite you to do is actually just do whatever meditation is for you. Whatever your practice is, or if meditation is a relatively new thing for you, whatever you conceive of meditation to be. Kind of just no instruction, no guidance here. I'm going to set a timer, and we'll do this relatively short. How does 3 minutes of just meditating? Does that sound okay? Does that sound manageable? Okay, for the type of people that would probably be members at RMRC, I'm assuming that's very doable. But this is just to get a little bit of an orientation to what your experience is and what the mind is like. So no rules here, anything goes. We're just going to meditate, spend time in silence for 3 minutes. So I'll ring a bell. You'll hear the bell again when we're finished. I think it'll probably go by pretty quick. But feeling free to just find a space that's a posture, whatever is comfortable for you to meditate now. And the only thing I'll say here is just noticing what happens in these 3 minutes. Okay, so see you in 3 minutes. Feel free to come back as you're ready. And yeah, just maybe noticing now, what was that like? And thanks for entertaining us. Thanks for just meditating generally here for 3 minutes. So if anyone would like to be brave and kind of share, okay, this is what I noticed in those 3 minutes. The good, the bad, the ugly. What showed up for you?
I felt very relaxed. There was something pleasant about letting go of listening and thinking about words and concepts and just being. It's like,
Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Great, yeah. Again, I feel like we have a group of seasoned practitioners here, but it's like, oh, all right, we get to be silent. Yeah, some people, when I start teaching them meditation, it's like, what? We have to be silent for 3 minutes? I don't think I can do that. For us, it's kind of like, oh, thank goodness, I can move from this space of concepts, thinking, trying to understand, into just being. Ooh, great. So did anybody else notice that they felt a little relaxed getting that 3 minutes to be in silence? Others? Great. Yeah.
Normally I would practice in the morning, and so that I start in darkness, and then when I finish and open my eyes, it has become lighter. And what startled me is when I opened my eyes that it had become darker. And it was almost like, wait a minute, is something wrong? What's wrong here? And then I realized, okay, it's cool. It's, after 7 o'clock. But it was actually very jarring. My expectation when I opened my eyes was light, and it wasn't there.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a bit of a jarring experience there. I was thinking meditation moving to like light. Here it's like, oh, it's moved into the darkness. That does sound quite jarring. Did anybody else have an experience like that where it felt kind of a little bit jarring, or kind of noticing of just like agitation, things that were uncomfortable?
Yeah, I did. I do my best meditations in the morning. In the afternoon, I find it very difficult to sit still, to keep my mind to keep the laundry list from, getting longer.
Yeah.
And it's easier in the morning than it is in the evening.
Yes. Great. Yeah, this is absolutely something that I think is so important to pay attention to, of like, when is meditation, easy for us? In a sense, it could be like, when do we have our energy? How do our circadian rhythms flow? We talked about cultivating wakefulness. It's kind of nice to be able to jump into the practice in our daily lives at a time that we experience wakefulness. Just seems like things go a little smoother then. Okay, so I'm really appreciating the sharing of what I would call like the light and the dark. We sort of have maybe a nice experience here, something a little jarring here, challenge, distraction, low energy. All is welcome. I think really holding all these experiences gets us at something both useful and meaningful here. So thanks for whatever everyone's sharing. Anything else that anyone would like to share just about how that was?
I just want to add, Upali, if I'm in the evening, if I'm sitting in a room full of people, it's a totally different experience.
And I'm guessing that it's because I can pull off the energy of other people to settle easier.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about that, isn't there? Like, there's just an experience that's distinct when you get to sit quietly with others. Time and time again, I hear so many people describe that. It's like there's just a certain energy to it, a certain feeling to it. I feel it all the time when I go for my at-home practice and teaching online. And I get to go to a room full of meditators at a retreat center. It's like, wow, there's something here that just really is distinct in a really nice way. Wonderful. I'm really enjoying how, again, I think this is sort of a special experience that we can kind of candidly talk about what's present momently unfolding in our practice as opposed to just an idea of it. So I'm going to propose just a little bit more of idea and instruction here. And this is going to take us into our next experience. So we're just going to compare and contrast and just see what unfolds here. Okay, so before the instruction was just to meditate, whatever that is for you. This time I'm going to invite you to do something that's a little bit more on brand with this attention and awareness thing. And for some of you, it might be just kind of old hat, just an experience that you've are totally familiar with in meditation. For others, it might be a little distinct, like it's a way of approaching meditation that's just different from how you've done it before. So I'm going to invite you to use a meditation object. And again, I would recommend the breath, and in particular, breath at the nostrils. And the reason being is when we talk about the breath, here is for most of us, this is usually a neutral meditation object. The breath isn't too closely associated with like super positive experience or super negative experience. If you ask the mind to sort of rest on it, it's neutral in the sense that it's going to provide a lot of contrast to anything happening outside of it. That's probably what's distinct about paying attention to the breath versus paying attention to a movie. The movie has quite a bit of stuff going on. It's not so neutral. It's not as contrasting to our other experience. So the breath really is. As you're able to, as you would like to, I'll invite you to pay attention to your breath. And if you have another meditation object that you're just really set on using, that's okay too. But trying to get into something that's just like an experience that's happening right now. So you're breathing right now. Okay, and so the next thing that I'm going to say is that's our aspect of attention. We're going to try to let the attention rest on the breath at the nostrils. And maybe what we'll notice, and this is why I like breath at the nostrils, is in terms of the way we can experience the breath, our capacity to perceive and notice sensation is physiologically its greatest, again, for most of us, at the nostrils. So we're going to be we're just more sensitive here. Being able to notice sensation in a neutral object is just a bit more engaging, and that it gives the mind a little bit more to pay attention to. So not only will we pay attention to the breath at the nostrils, but if you want to even go a little bit further, this might be kind of distinct if you are a breath meditator. There's a commentary on a sutta here that I think is really useful. It gives a metaphor for like how to pay attention to the breath. So you could think of the breath as a saw that's moving back and forth. What you're doing with that saw is you're sawing a log. Now, if you were actually sawing a log, you wouldn't watch the saw move back and forth. And you also just wouldn't stare at the log. Whether you're going to be the most accurate and consistent is you're going to look at the point where the saw is touching the log and just notice that point there, notice it moving back and forth. So just like you would rest your attention there on that point for the saw on the log, we're going to do the same for the breath. You're going to find a point kind of at the nostrils. It might be kind of in the nostrils, high in the nostrils, maybe even in the upper lip, where you experience the breath. What you're going to try to do is let the attention rest at that single point and notice the breath just moving back and forth over that point. Hopefully that sounds like a nice and enjoyable task. What's distinct about it is like the attention won't move up and down with the breath. It'll stay at that single point. We'll just try to notice sensation there. And maybe you'll notice quite a bit of sensation. Maybe you'll even notice an absence of sensation. And this is what's really key here, because what matters is the attention being stable. This is why we would pay attention to the breath. Cultivate stability of attention. So long as there's perception, whether it's the perception of like, ooh, coolness on the in-breath, or oh, warmth on the out-breath, or if it's like, there's nothing, I'm not noticing anything. It's like in between the in and the out-breath, there's no sensation. Whether you're perceiving sensation or you're noticing a lack of sensation, you're noticing. So we're going to be focused on that point of attention, almost the location of it, and trying to notice what's happening there in that location. It's also nice about thinking about this as a location is when the inevitable instance of getting distracted happens, it gives a pretty clear, tangible place to return to. It's like, okay, there's the place that I'm going to return to, and there's also these sensations that are happening right now. So again, with the breath, noticing sensation is kind of distinct. It's like what's actually happening right now, as opposed to the idea of the breath, a visualization of it. It's really getting into that space and those moments of what's happening right there in your experience. So that's what we're shooting towards. Okay, so that's the aspect of attention. And I want to go into the aspect of awareness in a moment, but I'll just ask you. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to do this for maybe like 5 minutes this time. What do you think is going to happen as you pay attention to that single point of attention, breath of the nostrils? So what do you think is going to happen in your experience?
Don't know, I'll find out.
All right, we've got some curiosity. Great. Interested to find out. Any other guesses or predictions of the future? Well, it's totally possible that you might just totally, bliss out and go deeply absorbed into samadhi with this wonderful new breath instruction. Certainly hope that's your experience. But in the case that it's not, that's maybe a little bit of being with the breath and then a little bit of being distracted, or a little bit of breath and a lot of distraction. That distraction being like content, storytelling, or maybe that distraction being it's late at night. Upali has been talking for a long time about these complex topics and I'm really tired. Maybe it's sleepiness, tiredness, dullness. These things inevitably will arise. And again, it's good in that sense of it's great that our minds are complex. This is really useful towards our well-being. So we're just in a process here. We're cultivating unification of mind. And the way that we're going to do that is almost more important than knowing our intention here, being with the breath, is to also know that we want to return whenever we're distracted, whenever we're lost, whenever we fall asleep. So that's what we'll practice over these 5 minutes. Is as soon as you're aware, the aspect of awareness, it's like you have that aha moment of like, my attention is not with the breath, this is something else, return. And this process of returning is really, especially for beginning meditators, it's where the benefits of meditation really start to unfold. Like the metaphor of it being like the bicep curl for the mind. It's like that act of returning is training that unification, but it's really where we start to notice like, I was with that. And now I get to be back to that present moment, maybe even calm experience. So nice to return. So really celebrating returning, enjoying returning, that positive feedback loop is so key. The mind learns best from positive reinforcement, and that's exactly what we're going to try to cultivate here. If distraction arises, if tiredness arises. So really enjoying the noticing, enjoying returning as you're able. And one final thing I'll say with this is, there's so much to say. It's hard to keep this concise. Do my best. I guess I'll just use a couple metaphors here. Sometimes I like to think of if I'm noticing busyness in the mind. It's like your mind is it's a puppy that's trying to be in a circle. So you put the puppy in the circle, and of course, it's a puppy, it's high energy, it's going to run out of the circle. But all you're doing is, you love the puppy. It's just so adorable and soft and cuddly. You just want to gently guide it back into the circle. And what's great is that as you're kind to the puppy, it really likes hanging out with you and being with you. And also it actually learns. It learns to hang out in the circle. We're just kindly returning the breath back to that location. Another thing would be, I kind of sometimes like to think of myself in the third person when I'm meditating. It's like watching your friend meditate. They get distracted. You can kind of be like, oh, if you're a good friend, you're like, oh, you don't get mad. You're just sort of like, hey, you're doing a good job. Great try. Get back to it. Like, I know you can do this. You're doing wonderful. So those are some metaphors of the positive reinforcement and the returning. Also knowing that it might be the experience of a little bit of both. And what we'll want to do is kind of work with foreground, background. If you're noticing that there's the breath and there are other things, try to, if it's feeling like 50-50, see if you can make it 60-40 or 70-30. Try to let the breath really come to the foreground and everything else hang out in the background. Okay, so those are the instructions. We've got our point of attention. We're going to try to cultivate stability of attention with the breath, the nostrils. When things arise, really celebrating, noticing them and enjoying returning. And then as you're able to really maybe even enjoy being with the breath. Any questions on the instruction here over these next few moments of practice? Okay, so I'm gonna give us 4 minutes this time around. I'll take a little extra time. And then we'll have just a few minutes to sort of close, which I think will be great. And maybe in this extra minute that I'm going to give us here, I'll just do a little bit of guidance. It'll be kind of a lot to get the attention to go down to a single point so quickly. So I'm just going to sort of guide us in this first moment to help us settle. So I'll take you to where we want to go, and then you can start trying this out and see what happens for you. Okay, so I'll ring the bell and we'll get started. And again, feeling free to jump into a posture, a place that feels comfortable for practice, comfortable and engaged. And I'll just say briefly here, maybe you're just starting by noticing the space around you. Like that shift from doing, thinking into being. Space of being, something you become aware of in the environment. We stand out a little bit more now. If there's any capacity towards curiosity and enjoyment, what you're finding, negative or positive, just observing and feeling free as it feels good to maybe bring, we could call the scope of our attention into the body here, the body as a whole. In the space of being, so anything that you observe in the body, any sensation that you can notice now. Positive or negative, all is welcome. Feeling free to bring ease or relaxation as you're able. Now maybe noticing the breath. You're just starting with 2 or 3 breaths here, wherever you experience the breath, maybe movement, sensations of air or wind, however that shows up in the body, just connecting with it now. Finally, I'll invite you to bring your attention down to the nostrils. Just having a bit of time for play here. Just trying to connect with that point where you notice sensation, being with that actual experience of breath where you can. Feel free to return. Anything that pulls you away. Celebrating anytime you are returning. Celebrating what you become aware of. And as you're ready, feeling free to come back into the Zoom space. So we're in sort of our last moment here of this webinar. I would like to take maybe one last minute or two to just check in, see what you noticed of this experience. Anything different from the first time
Yeah,
you'd like to share?
this is an unusual way for me to practice, right on the nostril, and your image of the saw and the point of contact really gave me this very specific focus. And I noticed this on-off quality where the sensation and the sound would go, you just feel it going up and down. There'd be a pause in sound and sensation, another pause. And then I could almost feel like little hairs in there, going up and down, up and down. Very specific, and I stayed with it because it was novel and interesting. I usually just focused on the whole thing, the whole breath.
Great, okay. Yeah, and this is wonderful. A lot of times when we're talking about cultivating stable attention, creating novelty for the mind is what will keep us engaged. In fact, sometimes a sign of advancement is that you're bored, that you need like more challenge. Wonderful. So an interesting experience of novelty, allowing the mind to sort of stick with the technique. This is great. Anything else that anyone would like to share about that experience? Again, the light and the dark.
I probably didn't hear all the instructions. Normally I do rising and falling, but I was focused, a spot right, maybe an inch, half an inch up in my nose. I could feel, it was cold coming in. And it took me a little while to notice the coming out, and it was cool. It wasn't cool. And then I was actually getting a little disturbed that I'm listening to you, and then we start talking about paying attention to something in the body. And I just want to be left alone and be with that.
Yeah. That certainly happened for me in guided meditations. Like, hey, I just came here to be quiet. You're distracting me. And in fact, you just told me to not be distracted. How am I supposed to deal with all this information? That certainly can be an experience of like kind of juggling kind of the guidance of the meditation and then kind of new content that's arising. Again, it's like turning up the volume knob on our experience as we're doing this. And sometimes that's towards pleasurable experience, but sometimes it's towards like a not as pleasant experience. So it's just one volume knob. It's all being turned up. Great. I suppose I just want to pause for one more moment just to see if there's anything else that feels important that someone would like to chime in and say about your experience. Okay, so since we're just a couple of moments over our time here, we'll finish here. What I want to close on is just this idea of, I think this kind of came up earlier in terms of the difficulty of putting experience into words, especially these meditative experiences. What I'm describing here is not the truth, right? There's nothing that I will say that is the truth. Rather, it's, to use the Buddhist metaphor, it's like a finger pointing towards the moon. All this instruction of cultivating samadhi and the process of how to do it in our conscious experience, it's certainly like a technique and an approach. And the intention of it is a certain guidance to get us towards an experience, to really hone in on kind of like what this experience is and what's useful towards cultivating it and to allow it to flourish. That's my hope and my intention for this evening, is that in our exploration together, that one, I hope it felt good to connect and talk with each other and even get to know each other a little bit and to share our experiences. And two, in coming away from this, that maybe there's a bit of like an understanding of consciousness, the mind, even a technique to play around with around a samadhi, stability of attention and strong awareness. So I'll close there, and I just want to thank you all so much for being here and going on this journey with me this evening. And it was really nice to meet you and talk about samadhi. So yeah, best wishes to all of you, and until next time.